This is Radio EBM.
Question of my own, probably partially follow up from what you just said, but with a small fun fact, just to make it more fireside chat than it is. So you were graduated in Liverpool, but you are originally from the Greater Manchester. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was born in a town called Bolton, not far from Manchester, or Radcliffe actually, which was a suburb of, if you like, of Manchester at the time, and close to Bolton. But I lived most of my life in Lancashire until I decided to leave the UK. I did postdoctoral fellowship from 1969 to 71 at the University of Illinois in the chemistry department there with a guy by the name of Ken Reinhardt. Some of you in the US may have heard of Ken Reinhardt. He was a big natural products chemist in the 1960s and 70s there.
Right.
And so I learned a lot more about mass spectrometry in his lab.
Perfect. But so yeah, like keeping in mind that you're from Greater Manchester, if I would be the football fan, I would probably ask whether Manchester is blue or red. But I decided to go deeper because I'm not just a football fan, I'm a good football fan. And I found the fact that Bolton FC, which is your like football club from the
Unfortunately, yes.
Right. In May 2005, they became the first football club to score 1,000 goals in each of the top 4 tiers of the English Football League. So the fun fact is the same year, 2005, the consortium that you have already mentioned just like 5 minutes ago of experts established a list of 29 core conditions that were designated as primary targets for all NBS programs. And of these, as you mentioned, 20 were on the MSMS panel. My question is, like, you highlighted the role of tandem mass spectrometry in expanding the range of detectable disorders. What do you think is the potential for developing this range further, and particularly in rare metabolic disorders?
Yeah, that's a good question. The issue is that each time you go for a different category of disease, if you will, with multiple conditions in it, let's say steroid disorders or bile acid disorders or whatever it is, you need another set of instruments. And, we're already pretty much running with a typical newborn screening program in the United States may have 5 tandem mass spectrometers doing analyte detection and 5 more doing the enzyme analysis. And, they're worked hard. Nowhere else that I know of runs more samples than a newborn screening lab on a daily basis, on an annual basis. They're running hundreds of thousands of samples and thousands a day in some cases. So those machines are very, very heavily used. We like to apply whatever reserve capacity we might have to do these second tier tests, which are so important. So more and more labs now are using any excess capacity they have to run the second tier tests so that we reduce that false positive rate before a result is reported. And that's extremely important. And we don't put enough emphasis on that even now. But if we had more mass spectrometers, that's the first place I would use them. Now, you consider another disease type, if you will, that would require even more mass spectrometers. We're getting into expense, we're getting into logistics problems, and even sampling problems. So where I see our contribution in mass spectrometry would be probably in the future to work with, say, genomics, because that's coming. It's unstoppable. There are already so many studies going on around the world where genomics is being used as a primary screening tool, whether it's targeted or not. And we are going to need mass spectrometry to determine whether or not these findings have any relevance in the patient, because you are going to get probably almost every kid with some kind of genetic issue if you do whole genome sequencing. Personally, I don't think we should do whole genome sequencing. I think maybe targeted is better. Targeted to a certain group of diseases, let's say. If we know the clinical, we know the genetics, then we can focus our mass spectrometry method on, but that would come in the diagnostic lab, not in the newborn screening lab. To me, it's already overwhelmed with instruments on the mass spectrometer side. And unless we can miniaturize these instruments in some way, they're going to remain expensive because, you know, they have vacuum systems and they have to deal with waste, and they have, you know what I'm talking about. It's very challenging to keep adding more mass spectrometers to a lab that already has 20 or 30 of them just doing the routine things. So I think we're not going to see a lot more of that, to be honest. Even if we want to, it's going to be some other omics technology. Targeted metabolomics will not be, I don't think, a good way to go, but certainly targeted genomics followed by a targeted metabolite search. But we have to know the metabolites are there. And so many of these rare conditions, we don't even know if we have a metabolite to look for. So that's a discovery phase thing. That's where metabolomics could come in. But it would be in the research side that, of course, people are trying to apply these techniques in research. But from what I can see so far, very limited success. Very limited. So it's a challenge.
I was going to say, on the clinical side, I have to say that more often than not, the biochemical genetics identifies something, and we're confirming that with genomics rather than the other way around, just because of the time restriction for genomics. So we did have one novel case not too long ago, and there's Triple H disease, and it was identified by biochemical long before it was confirmed by genetics. So
I think I agree with everything David said. I mean, genomics is coming, and it's going to be very dirty as a first-tier technique, but obviously it gets you a lot of conditions for which there are no biochemical first-tier assays on the horizon. You know, like there's no biomarkers for some neurological diseases, or, you know, cytoskeletal disorders, whatever. But it's very dirty, right? The false positive problem and false negative problem is huge. So the false negative problem, I would just say, is not going to go away easily, but they would argue it's better to catch, 80% of all these diseases than to catch none if we screen for none of them. So, but there'll be an enormous false negative problem that we'll just have to get used to. Right now it's taboo to miss patients, but they will be missing patients. The bigger problem for me is false positives with all the variants. And here David is right. We need a very robust, fast turnaround time biochemical technique to sort these out as part of newborn screening. And England is very careful in Genomics England to select only conditions for which there is a robust second-tier biochemical test, because they know it's a horrible mess if they don't. Okay, so they're very smart in England. But the idea that we're going to do 1,000 diseases and many we don't have biochemical second tier, that's just going to be a disaster.
Yeah, I will say as a corollary to what Michael just said is that in the space of rare diseases, the treatment opportunities have far outstripped our opportunities to screen for them, because of the fact that if you have developed, for example, a therapy, a novel therapy, which works in a rare disease, you get protection for 10 years. You get the opportunity to charge what you want to for that for that treatment, and it can be extremely expensive, as you know. So you've seen sort of an exponential rise in the number of treatments available for rare conditions, but only a very gradual increase in the number of screening tests that have been applied to those conditions. And that's what's prompting this urge to go into genomics. It's the fact that we're being left behind in the screening field by the sheer number of and you see what happens is this: you've got a rare condition, you have a treatment for it, but you can't find the patients, not without newborn screening, right? You can't find them, can't find enough of them to treat. So the push is, we need newborn screening for this or that or the other. And all that like Michael says, is overstripping our ability to develop methods because we don't have, for many of these, a biomarker. We may have a treatment, and that's the first component, essential component that you're required to have, to even decide whether you're going to screen for something. Is there a treatment available? Yes, there's a wonderful treatment available for condition A or B, but we don't really have a good biomarker for it. So what do? You have to do a genomic test, and then you're in trouble, like he says, with so many variants. And there aren't enough genetic cancers in the world to manage the data anyway. It has to be done by a computer.
Yeah.
Is the computer good enough?
No.
Is it big enough? Is it good enough computing?
Computer is not good enough.
No. So there we are. I think we're in that phase of it's going somewhere, but it's not really realistic to think of whole genome sequencing as a solution to all our problems. Not yet.
Yeah.
We do have a comment here or a question from Parvenir Kumar. With about 20% of newborns covered by tandem masks right now, what do you think the ability would be to scale up to cover the last 80% of babies born in a year by newborn screening?
Well, we've just covered that point. It's really not practical to do it with mass spectrometry. It's only conceivable with whole genome sequencing, but even then, we've got all these issues that result from willy-nilly whole genome sequencing. Now, there is an interesting thing here I forgot to mention, which is back a few years ago in Denmark, I think it was, or maybe it was the Netherlands. They do, with the technology at the time, they did do a whole genome sequence on their newborns. But it wasn't to screen babies, it was to develop a database, a biobank, right? So here you have banked information on genetic information from each newborn. Down the line, if something develops that requires some specialized treatment or a diagnosis, you have already got the genome sequenced and there, waiting to be addressed.
Assuming you can pull it back out.
Yeah. So later in life, if something happens, you can extract it. Now, that's an interesting idea. Conceptually, it could work in America because, well, you know what would happen here. It would never fly. But the idea that it even got into practice in the Netherlands was, to me, very fascinating. And that was some years ago. So what impact it has had to do that on human health in that country, I do not know, but it's certainly worth keeping an eye on. As that's an interesting idea, not to actually do anything active at the time, but to have the information available to interrogate. And then you're not messing around with all these possibilities and requiring computers to look at what could be important in there. You're just saying it's there, and we can get it back at a moment's notice and interrogate it when we need to. To do any kind of diagnosis with that kind of information, you have to have clinical information to put in to limit the possible range of genetic material to look for. Otherwise, it gets overwhelming in a big hurry.
I can also say it's not always as easy as we expect to pull that data back out, reanalyze it. It depends on how good the system was set up in the first place, on how how easy it is to do it on the back end. So,
and the technology is changing almost on a monthly basis.
This episode was recorded as a part of MSACL Connect podcast. Click the link below to watch the full interview with Dr. Millington, the legend of mass spec science. And frankly speaking, the discussion was pretty interesting. So like, subscribe, and don't miss the next video.